So I think I am the only person talking about photography, but that's cool. Hopefully some of the theoretical sources I think are going to resonate, although my paper is less engaged with phenomenology. So this is a part of my dissertation research, or at least I hope it's going to be. It develops out of my MA work, which was about Jeff Wall. But I'm also going to be talking about his relationship with Manet, and I say that because I am not a Manet scholar, and I'm in no way qualified to evaluate what is by now a very large and complex literature on him. But it's actually great, Moira, that you showed the old musician, because it was by seeing the old musician that kind of got me started on this whole thing about unity and fragmentation. Because this is very much a work in progress, again, at the end of my talk, or I guess after lunch, I welcome all of your comments and criticisms. Okay, so I'm sure that Jeff Wall is already familiar to most of you. He is a leader of what is now called Tableau photography, a mode that has become synonymous with contemporary art photography of great seriousness. The Tableau mode is characterized by a complex game of relay and reference between mediums and historical periods of art. In interviews and writings, Wall has often referred to specific sources in paintings, and as a consequence, hunting down Wall's art historical sources has become something like a standard operating procedure for interpreting his photographs. To the point where Wall himself could say, "The idea that I relate somehow very especially to painting is a kind of cliché that has become attached to my work." So what I'm going to do in this paper is I'm going to begin by explaining how Wall's art historical sources have been treated by critics, who have supposedly identified references to Velázquez, Ad Reinhardt, Jan van Goyen, Poussin, Claude, and many others. Of the most important of these references is probably the 19th century French painter Edouard Manet and the program of the painting of modern life. Okay, so I'm going to do that first, then I will summarize some of the objections and problems with this approach, and finally I hope to restore some substance to the cliché that Wall is somehow a photographer of modern life. I want to claim not that Manet helps us understand something about Wall, but that what we cannot understand in Manet is equally unavailable for understanding in Wall, but also that this obscurity should not be taken as mere meaninglessness. Okay, so to begin, here are some examples of sources for Wall's work in Manet. On the right is The Destroyed Room, which was his first transparency in lightbox, which is now called his signature medium. And he mentions Delacroix in, I think, writings and interviews. And you can see between the two works there are some obvious formal similarities in the palette and composition, and they seem to share themes such as violence and patriarchy. Wall's second work in this medium was Picture for Women, which is on the right, and it has often been linked to Un bar aux folies bergères by Manet. The themes here, again, are normally something like urban spectacle or alienation. And one final example, but there are many others, is The Storyteller, which is a bit of a later work, which is often compared to and set against the Déjeuner sur l'herbe, okay, and so on. So you kind of get the idea. So, okay, there are a number of problems with this approach, and these have been pointed out by some critics, so this is not all original to me. For instance, one might object that identifying sources alone is no explanation at all. Rather, the sources themselves are the very thing that needs explaining, and I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But more serious, perhaps, are the objections to this entire business of source hunting altogether. First, identifying sources is a venerated and orthodox exercise in art history, but when it comes to contemporary art, this might be methodologically problematic. Second, we note that processing Wall in this way has the nice bonus of legitimating him and, of course, boosting his prices, while at the same time affirming Manet's status by making him newly relevant. All in all, it reproduces the entire system of cultural distinction itself, since, as Julian Stallebras notes, making art historical references is one of the most reliable tactics to get a work discussed as if it is art. Within the context of the art world and the competitive positions taken by artists and critics and historians, it is hard not to see such references to sources as a form of social display, and as being indelibly marked with the inequalities of class, education, and the opportunity for cultural leisure. Indeed, James Elkins goes so far as to say, I regard Wall's work as a trap laid for art historians, especially those familiar with the key moments in the history of art that Wall likes to take as his points of departure, even, one might say, those who helped frame those very moments. A number of Wall's photographs are almost pre-digested for art historical consumption. Okay. Nor is anything really explained by generalizing, as Boris Groys does, although to be fair, this comes from an interview, that much large format photography seems to have taken on the role of 19th century painting, because contemporary painting, although some of my colleagues might dispute this, is no longer in a position to do what 19th century painting did, namely to make statements about the world. In fact, I do want to claim that Wall's Tableau photographs make statements about the world, but I'm going to insist that they do so by cultivating illegibility. It might seem sophistical, or at least banal, to claim that pictorial art, in order to make statements about the world, must equally be able to resist interpretation. But I insist on this because I think it implicates the whole phenomenon of source hunting and the state at which art history had arrived by about 1978, when Wall made his first Tableau picture. But first I want to explain what I mean when I use the term illegibility here. So although the source hunters, I think, move in the right direction, they miss the mark. By identifying Manet as a source for Wall, these explanations, it seems to me, paradoxically illuminate an obscurity that is shared between the two artists' work, which is obscured in turn by the very lucidity of the iconographical match. This might not be universally true for all of Wall's sources, but Manet, in fact, is notoriously obscure. So I don't want to claim necessarily that this is true for the comparison with Eugène Delacroix. The following remarks pertain only to the comparisons with Manet, or the sources in Manet. So the first thing that we must recognize is that to the degree to which Wall borrows motifs or compositional strategies from Manet, Wall's work is also enigmatic, obscure, or illegible. Panofsky warned long ago, in 1955, that iconographical analysis, or the identification of sources, was merely a stage in interpretation to be followed by iconological synthesis, or an understanding of the artwork's full meaning. But with Wall, source finding actually impedes our understanding of this fuller synthetic meaning, because we assume the meaning to be located in the source, when in fact, what is in the source is illegible. Thus, what we actually have is clarity in obscurity, and we must hold fast to this contradiction, to explain it without explaining it away, without demystifying the mystery or dissolving the very object we want to grasp. Granted, some of Wall's interpreters do seem to see his photographs as difficult, and they describe their language or they describe this difficulty in a language that is similar to that was used by 19th century critics of Manet. So here's one example about Wall's work in general. Importantly, the narrative of each picture is next to impossible to ascertain. We cannot know what exactly is going on. Thus, the essence of these pictures is not narrative, but a structure of pictorial and abstract elements. Or, as so often with Wall, this is increasingly true with time, something seen has been reconstructed in exact detail, but the exactness is not aimed at achieving verisimilitude. That's from the editors of his catalog raisonné. One curator finally claims that Wall's art, like a riddle, suggests a dream work more than anything else. Joyce and Orden, two critics who have written on Wall, have talked about a ventriloquist at a birthday party in October 1947, which is the work on the right, and have compared it to Manet's Luncheon in the Studio. They describe Wall's work, and this is just one final example to elaborate, as an assembly of parts whose relation is permanently in question, located in space that is far from certain, generating what they call a compelling hermeneutics of suspicion. On the Manet, they write, again in similar terms, what as surface matter is balanced and unified is, in terms of subject matter, a collection of isolated parts, each with its individual quality. The effect, they conclude, is puzzling.